Hello, hello. Good evening to everybody out there on the interwebs. This is the Oddball Show, and my name is Scholar from JP Line Productions. I'm joined tonight by my bandmate, partner in crime, Professor, also from JP Line Productions. And our special guest tonight is a good friend of both of ours, Dr. Chris Paddock, who's actually a resident of Baltimore. And the focus of tonight's podcast, as well as a follow-up podcast, which we'll have later in the week, is going to be Baltimore and beyond. That's what we're going with a title for the central theme for these next two casts, and we really want to dig into what's going on, not only in Baltimore, but in our country, in the U.S. and even beyond, even globally. That's led to all of the unrest and all of the turmoil, all of the the media portrayals of discord going on over the past really 18 or 20 months. And we're bringing Chris along because he does live in Baltimore and he's a good friend of ours. We want to be absolutely clear in stating that Chris's opinions and our opinions here tonight don't necessarily have to reflect what you're thinking, what your beliefs are on some of these hot button issues. Race relations, police brutality, how the media portrays all of that. Things like that, hot topics these days. These are our opinions, and we're presenting these opinions to you because we firmly believe that the first very achievable and very critical step towards bridging the gaps in some of the disagreements that we have and working towards change to fix, or at least start to fix, race relations and police brutality and social unrest and things of that nature. To the point where a riot doesn't have to be, your last-ditch effort for social change, where they say, the riots are the voice of the unheard, and that's very true. And some of us believe that, some of us don't. But what we're out to accomplish is to open up the dialogue so that it doesn't get to that point, so that it doesn't go that far. It doesn't have to go that far all the time. So, with that in mind, we've got an open forum tonight. Again, I want to introduce Dr. Chris Paddock. Chris, what's going on? How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. And I think you made a good point there, talking about riots being the voice of the unheard, and wanting to get a little dialogue going, because frankly, it is the voice of the unheard, but these aren't people who should be unheard. And so we want to start getting those voices out there and make sure that people start paying attention and start listening to what people have to say before they have to say it, because they're not getting heard.
Absolutely.
So, like I haven't said, we're, what I want to represent tonight is be very clear about, the perspective that I take on the situation here in Baltimore. I've been, I'm a resident here. I've been here for about a year. Before that, I was in Washington, D.C. and would come up fairly regularly. So I've started to understand, more about the city, and I feel like I have a good pulse on, my neighborhood and the local area. I'm white. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. The neighborhood I live in is called Federal Hill, which is kind of a large term to describe a bunch of neighborhoods that are very, very close to downtown. They're a little bit isolated from the rest of the city in that they, like South Boston up in Boston, kind of cut off from the rest of the city by water. There's highway on one side, so we're a little bit isolated, which, if we sort of get in exactly how the riots affected my neighborhood, that will help explain a little bit about, we didn't experience that much here, partially because we're a little isolated. The other thing to note about my neighborhood is that and kind of talking a little bit about the history of Baltimore is, for those who don't know Baltimore very well, it was a very, very important uh, area, maybe about 100 to 50 years ago. It was a main shipping point. It was like a main distribution and destination point for a very, very large area of the country here in the Mid-Atlantic. And so there were lots of jobs here. There was a lot of money concentrated here. People built very big houses. It was very, very wealthy. And when economic shifts happened, and that basically led to shipping becoming much less important here in Baltimore, there was a really significant drop in the level of jobs available. It meant that a lot of people moved out of the city, and it meant that a lot of money left the city. And so people who were in my neighborhood really depended on the jobs that were provided by that shipping industry. And the area took a pretty hard hit. So in the past 50 years, 30, 50 years, this has been a fairly poor neighborhood because it was so dependent on this one industry that then left. But in the past 10 years, it started to get more revitalized. It's close to downtown, and so we're seeing a lot of old homes that are being gutted basically and remodeled to cater to more of a young urban crowd. A lot of people commuting up from D.C. So that's kind of my neighborhood. So within my neighborhood, it's a very, very predominantly white neighborhood, but there's this tension obviously between people who have been here for a couple generations, people who lost their jobs and really kind of didn't have the wherewithal to be able to move out of the city, stuck around, and those people who are kind of coming into the city. And then between that, obviously, as well, I'm sure we'll get in touch with, there's additional levels of friction between the fact that this is a white neighborhood that's also very, very close to more predominantly African American neighborhoods. So there's some tension there as well, and we can talk about that as the podcast goes on. So that's kind of the background on this on
Awesome.
Where I am, and also a little bit about the city itself.
All right. Well, let me ask you something, and Chris, feel free to jump in at any point here.
Yep.
For the interwebs, I am Scholar. My bandmate is Professor. I am also
Hello.
Ivan, and my bandmate is also Chris. So, so when Dr. Chris calls out Ivan and Chris, I said that's who he's referring to.
Oh yeah.
In any event, no worries, homeboy.
The issue here is that I even before this podcast started reverting to some even much older nicknames. So we'll leave those out of here altogether. But the Scholar and Professor and I have known one another for over 20 years at this point, and so we might fall back into some more old school teenage type of behavior.
And if and when that occurs, I will do my very best to qualify all statements and
provide
some background so that our listeners aren't totally confused.
I'm going to run with the confusion. I'm just going to go with it.
There you go. Order and chaos. That's what we do best at JP Line Productions and the Oddball Show. And then, so Chris, so Dr. Chris, Dr. Pat, I wanted to ask you. So talk to me about the curfew, because you talked about how your town, it's Budden, but it's a little isolated, but it's close to a more predominantly African American town. How has the curfew affected you? How has the curfew affected surrounding towns that you may have witnessed in your travels? Talk to me about that. Speak on it.
And is the curfew the single biggest thing that people are feeling? I don't want to use the O word. I don't want to use the oppressed word, but that they're feeling like is it out of line?
That's hard to say. What I can definitely speak in terms of oppression. I mean, the issue is, I think, and again, I can't speak for a lot of folks here, but I can say that a lot of what happened over the past couple of weeks isn't necessarily because of black-white tension. I think that it's important to underline that fact. This is Baltimore, and I apologize for making it that distinct. On a national scale, obviously, when we talk about race relations, we can't really draw that sharp line because we have people of Asian descent, we have Hispanics, But here in Baltimore, you know, I mean, people of Asian descent is only about 2% of the population. Hispanics only 4%. It's a pretty small minority. But the point I was making is that it's not necessarily about race. This is a, you know, 60% African American city, you know, in which the mayor is African American. You know, there's a lot of political power coming in the city and in the state from the African American community. So to talk about it strictly along racial lines, even though that's present, that's not the only defining factor, but certainly policing is a pretty significant, that's really the main focus, I think, for a lot of residents about what was going on here in the last days is really about the policing.
Was it worse for black folk? Is it,
for sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, and I can even pull that back to what was going on here as far as the curfew goes, you know, because I think that really exemplifies exactly what the disproportionate enforcement of that, you know, the disproportionate enforcement of the curfew, I think, speaks to the bigger issues going on with policing in Baltimore. Is that, you know, we did not have a significant amount of violence here in the neighborhood that I live in, you know, during the during, you know, some of the rioting, some of the outbursts. We had a mild amount, you know, there were a couple windows broken, there were a couple, you know, one shop was, you know, had some stuff stolen out of it, basically, but it wasn't a significant amount of violence going on here, and whether it's because of that or whether it's because of disproportionate policing, but, you know, even though the curfew was effective, you know, in this neighborhood and people generally seemed to respect it, you know, all the shops closed up, all the restaurants closed up, everything was closed, people were in their houses. You know, when you would read about what was going on in other neighborhoods as far as the policing goes, you know, they would talk about that the police would be coming by with bullhorns, telling people to get into their homes. That did not happen in this neighborhood at all. You know, I didn't see any police during that neighborhood. You know, we occasionally see people out driving. So, you know, there is definitely the majority of enforcement of the curfew was not here in this neighborhood, and even one of the things about Baltimore is it's a small city, and so you'll have small, predominantly African American neighborhoods. You'll have small, predominantly white neighborhoods. They'll be right next door to each other. They'll be, you know, within like a block or two, and the neighborhoods themselves aren't even that big. There is definitely a lot of uneven policing as far as that goes. So, for example, in some neighborhoods that are predominantly white, which are directly next door to predominantly African American neighborhoods, you would have the curfew, you know, stringently enforced in some areas and not in others. So, you know, that was definitely, without a doubt, part of what was going on here.
And you know, the disproportionate policing, is it visible? I mean, are the towns that close that the people being policed, you know, more stringently can see others getting away with, you know, with not being policed, getting away with things that they can't get away with because, you know, because of the added police presence?
I would say definitely, you know, and I think it was interesting a couple of weeks ago that you know, Jon Stewart, when he was talking about what was going on in Baltimore, said basically that the police in Baltimore are charged with hiding, you know, effectively hiding a whole section of the population from the rest of the population, from another whole sector of the population. And I think that is very clear as far as the policing goes, that it's really defined along containment lines and, you know, drawing very strict lines as far as some neighborhoods getting attention and some other neighborhoods getting no attention, and basically that these are kept very, very strictly, you know, apart from one another. So you know, people can see it, but at the same time, the neighborhoods are very, very sharply divided between one another.
And this may or may not go without saying, I don't know, but but would you say that you know, that visibility, that, you know, that you know, environment where you can see other people being policed more than your own, you know, or at least, you know, the divides in the towns, does that add to the tension? Does that add to why people are pissed off and why, you know, some of the violence may have occurred?
Oh, for sure. You know, because it is such a small town, everybody, you know, one of the things about Baltimore is that you have African American people, you have white people living in very, very close proximity. Everybody is really right on top of one another, and so, unlike some other cities or other parts of the country where you have these large distances that kind of separate people, and so people can put things out of their minds. Here, everybody really does live right on top of one another. So the downtown, which is known here as the Inner Harbor, is especially starting in the late 90s and then moving through the 2000s. There's a lot of money put into gentrifying it, making it a shopping area, bringing restaurants, bringing bars, upgrading the stadiums, making it bringing a lot of money into it, really stepping up the businesses, and very, 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 very close to that, you have some of really you have neighborhoods that have significant amounts of vacants. There is not a huge amount of there's huge amounts of inequality between those two areas that are very, very close to each other. You have some of Baltimore's very poorest neighborhoods. Like I said, the problem of vacants is very, very big here in Baltimore, and some of those neighborhoods are, less than a mile, to a very, very ostentatiously wealthy, very aggressively improved area of the city. So that's a big disparity that exists here in Baltimore.
So you've got, and another thing I wanted to ask a little earlier, not to jump around too much, but the curfew, you said, in your estimation, it's definitely affecting black folks a lot more than the whites around town. What about poor folk? I would assume there are poor whites. There are everywhere, across the country. That's just the nature of,
Well, I mean, you mentioned
how class works.
Your neighborhood is blue collar white, right? That's what
It is. It would be blue collar if anyone had any jobs.
Fair enough.
What I would say.
I gotcha.
It is an area that was hit really, really hard when the industry dried up, and so it is a very it is very, very historically very poor area. I live in a renovated loft apartment. So on the one hand, I live in a relatively nice apartment, but it also means that 10 years ago, this was a neighborhood that had a giant abandoned, warehouse in it, and that was really just kind of par for the course. And so, even despite that, I would say that there is still some pretty there is some disparity there. We have a good amount. There's a decent amount of police activity here, but even just sitting in and watching the police helicopters. The police helicopters do not come to my neighborhood. They occasionally come over here, but they're not hanging out here on a regular basis. They're definitely, I can see them over in West Baltimore when they move around here. So it's definitely a disproportionate amount of policing that's going on here in the city.
So you're saying So you're saying even lower class white folks are getting policed a little bit more stringently, or you're saying not so much, that it's
I would say
even
not so
it's
much.
still worse in the black neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I would say so. It's definite. Baltimore I think is notorious for pursuing a particularly aggressive form of stop and frisk.
Right.
And that generally does not happen here in this neighborhood, even though this is historically until very recently was a pretty economically depressed part of town.
Right.
And the area that I live in is I would say from using big words, I would say it's pretty demographically contingent with the area right south of here that's not in the city, and that area is that still maintains a lot of that same very, very blue collar, very low income white neighborhood. I can't speak to exactly what goes on there, but it's definitely historically it's a low income white area that even despite that doesn't get the same level of policing as most of West Baltimore, parts west of East Baltimore. So for sure.
Absolutely. Well, two things real quick. I think myself and Chris and also our listeners can handle the verbiage, so don't hesitate to use the big words.
Let's do it.
All right.
What does verbiage mean?
There we go. Maybe.
A word?
All right. So let me qualify my statement. I believe our listeners and myself can handle the verbiage. Prof, we'll fill you in on the back end. How do you get the name Professor? You don't know what verbiage means? Come on.
But seriously, what does it mean? Just help me out, man. I'm not,
Oh man. In any event, just to paint the picture, Dr. Paddock.
Yeah.
So we've got black folks who are being policed more stringently,
Yeah.
and in poorer neighborhoods. I'm assuming,
Yeah.
from what you're saying, right across the street, almost literally from these very well-off, up and budding neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And then you have an incident like Freddie Gray.
Right. Yeah.
On top of what's been going on across all of these incidents that are just making national headlines over the past, like I said, 18, 20, 24 months, whatever it's been. I don't want to say starting back with Trayvon, because I think that would be untrue. I think it's been going on for a very long time, but for whatever reason, and maybe it's the social media boom, people were just, more people were being aware, guerrilla news outlets, whatever the case may be, grassroots media, more people were being made aware of these disproportionate, let's call them conditions, that minorities, poor folk, have to deal with in this country. And you're living in a city where, like, they're right across the street from each other. Like, the people who have it good and the people who don't have it so good, they're right across the street from each other. Is a riot inevitable at some point?
Well, I think it's interesting you bring that up, because I think, the incidents here in Baltimore really kind of led me to question the whole idea of, what is a riot, what counts as a riot, what are we really talking about when we say that there is a riot. And if you look at the mainstream media, the whole narrative is about rioting, and that there's this riot that's happening, and it's making me question more about what happened in some of these prior incidents that had that same moniker applied to them. Everything that happened in Ferguson,
Well, let's talk about that.
I think it's a great discussion. Yeah, break that.
And because it's interesting, the mayor received a lot of flack for her handling of the incidents that happened. They said, as soon as we had this incident last Saturday, that she should have called out the National Guard. That it should have been locked down in the city. Certainly folks in my neighborhood were saying that.
Is that what you would have done?
I don't think so. I think she really had a good pulse on what was going on here. I think she understood I think she understood what was going on. I think she understood what the concerns of the citizens were. I think that we all forecasted a protest that was going to converge on City Hall, in which people were making their voices heard but weren't causing damage. And certainly, I think that we had two incidents, but between those two incidents, there was a day of peace. There was the day that Freddie Gray had his funeral. After the second incident, we had several more days of peace. There was a lot of peaceful protesting in the city, and I think that her reaction to have anticipated peaceful protest was the right one. I know that she came under a lot of fire, but I think that she understood what the concerns were, and I think that she made the right call in letting the protest go ahead without significant amounts of police presence. I mean, obviously there is an appropriate amount of police presence, but they weren't anticipating a dramatic confrontation like this. And I think it's received the image of being a riot here in Baltimore, and I don't think that that's really appropriate.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah. So incident. Day of peace, incident, couple of more days of peace. You're saying, hey, the mayor, she had it right. She wasn't, she couldn't necessarily have foreseen, or at least what the media is portrayed to Joe Average, to us not in Baltimore, as like the mass upheaval. She couldn't have foreseen that. It sounds like that's what you're saying. What happened with these incidents? Why did they ultimately lead to some form of rioting or some form of more aggressive demonstration, if nothing else?
What was the tipping point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Or is the tipping point, a fiction? Is it really that it seemed like a tipping point to us? Because I can remember that too. That when she did her press conference, then all of a sudden, at least on a national level, it seemed like it had blown up. And I don't know if that's more just perception or whether that's reflective of what's going on there.
And again, I'm speaking from my perspective, so I can really only comment from that perspective. I mean, there was some when the incidents happened last Monday, there was some comments from a group of black ministers here in the city saying that the state of emergency should have been declared 20 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The state of emergency is the lack of jobs, it's the lack of community, it's the lack of economic possibilities for the people of Baltimore that really contributed to things. So I think that without ignoring those problems, because I do think that those are enormous problems that the city needs to tackle, I think that looking at these incidents that happened, a lot of it really, coming back to what you said, Ivan, about really the confrontation between people from very, very different socioeconomic classes and circumstances has a lot to do with it. What was essentially a peaceful demonstration coming out of the African American community here regarding policing on the Saturday of the first set of incidents encountered essentially what was large amounts of white people here for the baseball game, and some of them.
What happened?
We can talk about that white reaction.
What does that mean?
Again, I don't think that there. Again, I wasn't there, but I've seen a lot of video and firsthand reports, and I think that that was really a lot of the confrontation that happened on that first Saturday. Is that basically you had the white neighborhood that I live in, especially with longtime residents, there has been some really vociferous, aggressive reaction to the African community, American community expressing its, significant frustrations with the policing, with the state of unemployment, with the poverty going on in their neighborhood.
Black people in Baltimore are pissed. They've had enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they were coming out to express that.
And they were protesting peacefully, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, and I think that they ran into a bunch of drunk people at a baseball game. I think that that's a lot of what happened on that day. And again, like I said, I wasn't there. I can only speak to my personal experience. I'll be very interested to hear exactly what the ultimate incident reports on these incidents. But based on a lot of the eyewitness accounts that I have been reading, and admittedly, I'm taking into account the mainstream media's portrayal, but I'm also looking at some additional, alternate sources. I think that we're looking at a confrontation that did happen, along those lines, where basically you had a peaceful demonstration that met a very hostile audience when it got to this downtown gentrified area. And I think that that's really what kicked off a lot of what was going on. And frankly, if the reports are true and people are getting, beers thrown at them and getting, yelled at and called all sorts of cuss words, is it really that surprising that, a lot of people get angry if they're already, expressing their displeasure, So.
Yeah.
Well, here, let me play devil's advocate for a second, though, because
go for it.
So I can understand the idea that rioting gets mischaracterized, but then we all watched, on a loop, 24 hours through the day on CNN. People burning a CVS, people burning a senior center, people looting, hordes of people running into, Target.
Lots of cars were reported.
Yeah, I mean,
I wonder about the accuracy of those numbers, but it had to have been a significant amount, even if they weren't the report.
At very least, we all watched some of that happen, so it's not like that's complete,
for
falsehood.
sure. No, I mean, without a doubt, without a doubt, there's definitely, I would say that there's a lot of hangers-on. I would say there's a lot of people taking the opportunity. Absolutely. There's definitely people taking the opportunity, and I tend to be a very quiet type of guy, and so, but I spent most of this last week. I mean, I'll be quite frank. I spent a lot of this past week on, riding around the buses and the public transportation with my earphones out, rather than, just listening to what people are saying and, not interjecting myself, because I don't want, it's interesting wanting to hear what's going on in the black community without really saying, well, what is going on in this community when they're speaking to a white guy. And so, there's a lot of folks out there who I think acknowledge the fact that there was a lot of people just out there, taking the opportunity.
Just taking advantage of the situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are really just taking advantage of the opportunity to, to be quite frank, it's people taking the opportunity to essentially, just get some stuff, not necessarily like huge amounts of stuff, but just get some stuff. So
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because that's definitely an element. And I would say that what we were looking at was with both of these two incidents on the Saturday, on the Monday. And again, this is all based on my perspective and the information I have, is that basically you had them kicked off, catalyzed by specific events, and then you get kind of mass action where basically you have people hanging, kind of grabbing onto that and taking the opportunity. So, we can't, Professor's right, we can't ignore that that's also going on here.
Right. And I mean, what's
It's a complicated picture. It's a complicated picture, but I think that it wouldn't. So even though there were effectively these powers on, I do think we kind of need to recognize exactly why these incidents got kicked off, and would we have seen all this under different circumstances? Probably not. Which is why I do think that the mayor made the right decision in letting people express themselves in the way that they were.
All right, so you can't anticipate the protesters running into a bunch of drunk people at a baseball game, getting stuff thrown at them and being called names. They're there to be peaceful. They're getting pissed off. Inevitably, some of that leads to some conflict, some discord, some haymakers being thrown, I would imagine, and then shit hits the fan.
Right.
Then it's just like, all right, we're here in the name of peace. We don't even know what you guys are doing, but you're inciting us. You're undermining the message that we're trying to fight for right now. We're fighting back, and then you got a lot of people just joining and hanging on to that because for two reasons. A, the opportunity's there. It's like, all right, well, I don't have anything. Let me go get myself something. And B, they don't feel bad about it because these are the same people that are being policed more stringently and have less economic opportunities to actually make something out of themselves outside of the crime route.
For sure. And even though, like I said, as I said earlier, this is a predominantly African American city where the governor's, the mayor's African American. The model of the political power in the city is invested in that community.
Right.
It still doesn't mean that there isn't that the city hasn't invested in those communities in a way that gives them, that gives people a sense that they have a stake in the city itself. It's still not a city that has encouraged people to feel that it's their city and that they have a stake in their communities. So certainly when you get an incident like this, people don't feel that they are being given a stake in their community. And so what connection do some of these people have to the city that they is now throwing bottles at them and yelling at them and calling them names.
And just like with every movement, with every every mob mentality type situation that occurs, whether it's organized or not, like you're always gonna have, and excuse my French, but you're always gonna have some dickheads out there doing it for the wrong reasons.
Absolutely.
And just looking to get something out of it, personal gain, and that happens. Peaceful protest too. You've got a lot of people out there that they might be out there to network. They might just want to be on TV. They might just want to feel good about themselves and not really care too much about. And on the peaceful protest, I say, hey, peaceful protests need as many advocates as it can get, genuine or not. Sign up. When it comes to rioting, I almost feel the same way, and I feel bad about it.
Why do you feel the same way?
Because I don't want to see people destroying their own homes. But it's just like, hey, if you're gonna riot, and if there's gonna be a riot, then let's make it as impactful and ugly as possible, so we can work on fixing it. You know what I mean?
I can't get behind that way of thinking. Because here's the thing, like the only benefit that this kind of violence or breaking out is that it draws attention, which is clearly a benefit because we're all talking about it, we're all looking at it. Inevitably,
but doesn't it force the government's hand, or forces somebody to do something about it? Like drawing attention to.
The only way to do it?
No, I don't think it's the only way to do it. I think our country is in a state right now. The climate in our country is in a state right now where that's it. I don't see people wanting to to actually pursue measurable change to to get our communities to a state where black people, poor people don't feel like their class and their skin tone has a direct effect on their level of comfort in any given situation. That's bullshit. And I do think that with the way our country is, set up right now and what's been going on, I think that's it. I think people have to, bring the roof down, and that saddens me. That really, really, really saddens me. I don't believe it's the only way. I think we can get ourselves to the point where that doesn't have to be the last-ditch resort. But I see it as that. I see it as a last-ditch resort. I don't think people get up and say, I don't think what happened in Baltimore was, a situation where people said, all right, well, we got to tear down our city to because of what happened with Freddie Gray and because of what's going on, within our communities all across the country. I don't think that's what happened. I think shit just hit the fan, and people said, that's it. That's it. I've had enough. For better or worse, genuine or not, I'm going in, and people went in. That's not to sound too preachy, but that's why we're having these discussions, because we feel that the first thing we can do as a country is to just talk about it. People are afraid to talk about race relations in particular. People are afraid or unwilling to acknowledge, white privilege, to acknowledge police brutality. There are people who don't acknowledge climate change, from a weather standpoint. It's mind-boggling. But again, not to sound too preachy, but that's why we're having this podcast right now. That's why, that's what we want to encourage everybody out there listening to do. Talk about it. It's okay. We can disagree. Yeah. We don't have to, we don't have to battle and come to blows when we disagree. But if we don't talk about it, hey, we're going to see some more riots. More shit's going to break. No?
No, right on, man. To some extent, I totally feel you. I totally feel you that there are places, and it's the same kind of thing that these aren't. It's not necessarily all the same story, but it's certainly a pattern, and it's in places that are, powder kegs waiting. Baltimore is a rough city, and
right.
If something like this goes down, it's just waiting for unrest. It's waiting for people who are just pissed off, who are pissed off enough to be apathetic, to be like, all right, well, screw this. I'm just going to burn down a gas station. I'm just going to, because I can't quite get my brain behind that mentality, no matter how angry I am, burning down. Because if they were burning down City Hall, if they were burning down something in
but they'll never get to City Hall, man.
Well, of course not. Of course not. I'm not saying that you're not going to be able to burn down City Hall. They're going to shoot first.
Yeah.
But I just can't quite get my brain behind it. I certainly can't judge it as saying, like that. How evil or ridiculous it is. That's not, when people are at their wits' end, bad things are going to happen. They're going to make interesting decisions, and I'm certainly not the one to judge that. But I can't quite get my brain behind, looting or burning. But
see, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people can't get their brain around it. I can't get my brain around actually doing it. I'd like to think that my cooler head will prevail in any situation. I could be wrong, I could be wrong. Like and to some degree, I'm fortunate enough to not have to experience those conditions every day. As a light-skinned Latino in this country, I have felt privilege. And a lack of it work for me and against me, and just everyday situations. And every time it happens, whether it's something that makes me, whether it benefits me or not, it pisses me off. I just think it's stupid. I don't think it should be that way. But I can't wrap my head around actually doing it, but I can wrap my head around it fundamentally. And I think that's where we're at. I just think, and one thing, Dr. Chris.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you, just we're talking about talking about it. For lack of a better phrasing there, what are some of the people in your neighborhood saying about what's going on in Baltimore right now? When black folks are around and when they're not around. It's how do they feel about it? Speak to me about that.
Well, that's interesting actually that you bring up those two situations, because I do actually have some two different situations to describe to you. Right.
I
think in the day after the when the National Guard was first called out, which was last Tuesday, I was walking around the neighborhood, and you had people speaking about, on the one hand, criticizing the mayor, saying that she should have, that this was a threat to public safety, and that the police needed to be holding people responsible because they had a duty to maintain safety and order here in the city, and in the same breath would be, were, effectively arguing for armed resistance and armed protection of their property against looters. And believe me, they were not anticipating that there was going to be white people coming through their doors, breaking windows and looting their shops. So you had this, unfortunately all too common and all too typical reaction to that. But I do have to say, so that was definitely the immediate reaction. And even today, I heard some, I was talking with some people, and they were saying basically that, there was almost this, the National Guard are gone, and there was almost a resentment that things had gone back to normal. And by normal, I think that they meant that there were still, African American kids in their neighborhood going to high school. There was almost this feeling that people in my neighborhood wanted this problem gone, and they didn't mean safe. They meant that they felt that this situation should have resulted in effectively, black people getting moved out of the neighborhood altogether. And so there definitely is that reaction very much. On the other hand, I do have to say that there is, among some younger people, not all younger people that I've been speaking with here in my neighborhood, there is some understanding of what's going on and why it, some of the root causes, but behind, that people in the African American community feeling as disenfranchised and disenfranchised as they are. There is some of that here, especially once the Attorney General announced that she was going to be holding these officers responsible for Freddie Gray's death. Yeah. In some form, in the form of a trial here. There is some understanding of that. I do have to say that it did take the form of a white guy here in my neighborhood explaining to a black guy what was going on. So there was definitely still a little bit of white splaining going on there.
Right.
But
right.
It's starting to dawn on people to some degree. Of course we're getting all that same reaction. The majority reaction is still very much the, why are black people complaining? They're complaining about this thing that happened over 100 years ago. It was, all that stuff is gone. None of this matters anymore. They get their welfare checks. They get free health care. We're out here working, stuff like that. So you do get that reaction here in my neighborhood. But there is at least some kind of dawning of what's going on. And I think beyond my city and the city as a whole, there is a broader understanding of the problem and wanting to really grapple with it in a real way that's being engaged with by people of all socioeconomic classes, all races. That it's a very, very, obviously the riot's very divisive. The city as a whole has really come together afterwards. Obviously portions of the city less so, but the city as a whole is getting very, very positive and getting very, very, really, really committed to working on this problem. And believe me, it's a big one. But everybody is, I think, feeling like they want to come together and actually solve this problem here for the city.
And that I think is, that I think is the hope, the silver lining.
Yeah.
When something like, a riot and all the property damage and all the violence and all, and the dead people that led to the riots in the first place.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't, property damage, yeah, it's part of it, but let's not minimize, let's not overlook why people were rioting in the first place. I mean, you've got, you've got a lot of dead people. Yeah. You've got a lot of dead black men, and you've got nobody even being tried for a homicide. I mean, it's,
you have very aggressive policing that really influences everybody here in the city. I was telling you guys earlier today that I was actually on jury duty today, and when you get selected, of course, they always ask you,
right.
Have you or anyone in your immediate family been arrested, convicted of a crime, and they go through this whole litany of things basically to determine whether or not what kind of interactions you've had with the legal system. And, when you're in there in that room, effectively the entire room stands up when they ask that question and says, yes, that's me. And this is a city that locks up a lot of that arrests and/or locks up a lot of its inhabitants. And as a result, not only does that have a very detrimental effect on the communities where that's happening, but then it additionally has this knock-on effect where that impinges on people's ability to then get jobs, which then has all these additional effects on those communities. And so, and that it's a very, very real effect. And so even if
that's
there
the systematic oppression that people talk about.
Absolutely.
Like that's it. It's just like, hey, you're fucking with people's lives essentially because of the color of their skin and/or how much money they have in their pockets.
Absolutely.
You're making it harder for them to become better. I mean, you're always going to have goons. You're always going to have bad people, quote unquote, people doing the wrong things. But if you happen to be born into a situation where your opportunities for coming out of that are systemically reduced, then you're going to get a lot of what's going on, a lot of what you're talking about, Chris.
Absolutely. And the city has really done a lot to in an effort to pull jobs into the area, but a lot of these jobs are pulling new people into the city but aren't really serving the communities that are already here in the city. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of white collar jobs here. There's a lot of jobs around the medical field that are going on here in the city, and unfortunately those are jobs that are passing by large amounts of the population. And even when they are able to get into some of those jobs, that money isn't then contributing significantly to any kind of financial gain within the African American community. And you have people who work at the hospital, which is right next to the neighborhoods that Freddie Gray lived in, but none of the money from that hospital is making its way into that city. And if it is, it's coming in the form of the paycheck, and it's going right back, and it's none of that money is sticking around in any of these communities here. So, absolutely.
So those are the only silver linings. You get people to at least try to understand and try to, if not try, if not become compassionate about it, then at least try to wrap their heads around it, fundamentally understand it, whether or not you agree with it, and hopefully it forces, the businesses, the city itself, the local government, to proactively try to change these things, to better the economies within these poor communities, so that people do have a chance to better the education in those communities, so that people do have a chance, and to really check the police, legislate.
I think it's a larger issue. I mean, that's really, not to jump in, but I think that's
no. Please jump in.
Even to split it apart from the impact of racial divide among authority, the impact of police and authority has been the single concurrent thread through all these, is that we need to redefine how police work. And then when you are able to redefine that, you're able to remove the element of one part of the population getting fucked up by the police and most of them being left alone,
No, I agree. It's
I mean, I do want to. I mean, it's a tough situation here in Baltimore because effectively a lot of the policing methods are the legacy of the past mayoral administration, and kind of this move to basically take all the methods that were quote unquote successful in New York and apply them here to Baltimore, and they really it's like they got put on a little bit of steroids, and so that's a huge issue here. At the same time, I do have to say my reaction in watching the city over the past week and a half, I gotta say that I do feel like this is a city that given the opportunity would be able to do the right thing, but just again the economics of the situation are really what's holding back the city, at least in here. And I'm obviously the reason you and I are talking about this is because this is one incident of several. This is one city that's been affected, and there's many others that have been affected, and so it's hard for me. You're looking at stuff happening on a national level. You're looking at stuff happening on a local level. I feel like, on a local level that, Baltimore has the opportunity to really move in the right direction, but the economics are really holding it back. But at the same time, there still are these bigger, broader themes of over policing that we've seen around the country, of the economic disparities that we've seen around the country. So to be sure, but like I said, we've really seen the city come together in the last couple of days, and I've really been very encouraged by that. And I think that it's a city that, given the opportunity, could do the right thing. But again, it's like these communities themselves. How much opportunity are they being given?
Right, right. No, these are watershed times, man. I feel like they're watershed times, and
I agree with you.
I'm encouraged that you, being a resident of Baltimore, also feel some encouragement as to how the city's responding and how the people of the city are responding to, what just happened over the course of the past, couple of weeks, month, whatever it's been, and really what's been happening, in the country as a whole.
Yeah.
It's tough, man. It's tough. That's why we're having these discussions. I think I think that's a good place to stop if you guys are okay with it. If there are any other points you want to make, let's open it up now for that. But before we go off the air, Dr. Paddock, I do want to briefly mention that Chris and I are in a hip hop band along with our bandmate Kogan Spaceman, and you a long time ago you were DJing and you made DJ Endo, you made a couple of cuts for us. So, again, Baltimore first. Anybody wants to chime in, add another layer to that discussion, now is the time. If not, I want to play a couple of those tracks just to, to sign us off tonight. Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask Patty for 2 more beats. That's what I thought you were going to
I think he's busy. Chris and I were talking offline. He's got a lot going on. Dr. Paddock is a very busy man these days.
Well, let me just first jump in and say, as far as, from the Baltimore and the political point of view, it sounds like you guys have a really great podcast lineup for a couple days from now. It sounds like you're going to get some more people who are going to be talking about things on the national level. I have, hopefully I gave you and the audience some thoughts about what was going on here in Baltimore, but,
you absolutely have, and we appreciate it. And just to chime in real quick, this is the first of 2 and maybe more podcasts that we're going to have, about these issues that are going on. It's at the very least the first of 2 Baltimore and Beyond podcasts. Baltimore and Beyond that we're going to have this week. So chime in later this week on Thursday if anybody's listening live. If not, you will you'll be able to syndicate it and hear it on the back end on the YouTube links that we will provide at jplineproductions.com as well as oddballmagazine.com.
And we got at the end there, we started to get into some of the, when we start talking about any one city, you can look at the city itself, but you have to look at the national stuff, and it sounds like, we talked a little bit about what was going on here in the city itself, but you guys are getting a lot of that national issues going on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
But,
thank you.
Wrapping that business up, let's. I just want to say, I've been working on some stuff, so it's a possibility that you guys might be getting a little tune drop here or there. We'll see. There's some possibilities. We'll see what happens.
Big possibilities.
Like scholars said, I'm a busy guy, but I do have the occasional little bit of downtime to work on some stuff. So maybe you might get some possibilities here in the next couple of days. What's
your DJ name, Dr. Chris? Tell us when you make beats, when you get into music, what do you call yourself?
I have, I'll be honest, the end up name was the one that I was going with for a long time, but it's been so long I've been out of things, and so I'm kind of thinking it might be time to redefine that a little bit and kind of
time for a rebirth.
I have like a good, I have like a slightly different repertoire of some different kind of flavors that I might be sending over your way. We'll see what you guys think of them, and we might have to come up with some additional name.
Yeah, I like it. Let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead with that in mind. Before we log off, I'm gonna see if I can cue a little something called "Blow the Speakers," where Chris brilliantly incorporated an Elastica beat, and he turned it into this. So the man, he's a man of many talents. He is a doctor. Homeopathic medicine, is that your specialty, Dr. Chris?
It is. Let me before we sign off here, can I make a quick request for Chillax? Do we have a copy of that we can maybe sign out
Let's
on?
do that. I was gonna sign off with Ice Cold, but you know what?
That's a good jam. I mean, I'll go for that too. You can do whatever you want. You know, there's a bunch of hits in there.
You're hooking us up. Let me find Chillax right quick. But talk to me a little bit about Blow the Speakers, just musically, because what you did there, you know, for everybody out there on the interwebs, he took a sample from I don't know, a rock band or maybe a pop rock type band called Elastica, an overseas band, and he blended it with some rumba drums, right? Is that what you did?
Something like that, yeah. So it's you know, for I don't know if it's still up on the JP Lime website, but you know, that's kind of a little bit of the direction that I'm moving in these days, where it's kind of going with a little bit of the rock kind of melody, and you know, then layering in some additional bass line stuff and doing a slightly faster, a little bit more up tempo drums. So we'll see what you guys think about that. I mean, we'll get some of those.
Hey man, we've rocked out to a few of your beats, especially our first album. Our first album, shameless plug, Lime on the Rocks, available at jplimeproductions.com or on iTunes and on Amazon. That album and even some of the cuts that we couldn't put on the album because of, you know, copyright. Yeah, that whole era for us was very DJ N-Dub heavy. You shot us a lot of stuff that
there was a lot of music I sent you guys that definitely was not copyright appropriate. So,
right.
But a lot of that
whole new era now, man.
A lot of that stuff ended up in hopefully in a lot of those live shows though. So you know.
Oh man, we often turn. I mean, Chris, speak on it. Prof, speak on it.
What's that on the?
Just turning to the N-Dub trucks when we do shows, and you know.
Man, there's a certain flavor and a certain energy that we need. You know, Blow the Speakers starts off a lot of shows.
Yeah,
you know.
Nice.
And Chillax finishes a lot of shows, right?
Yeah, it does. Most certainly does.
All right. Well, with that in mind, Dr. Chris Paddock, you know, on behalf of the whole Oddball Show family, Oddball Magazine, JP Line Productions, and AroundTheBean.com. Shout outs to our partners in crime, Chad Parenteau and Jason Wright from Oddball Magazine, who will more than likely, hopefully, be joining us on Thursday for the second cast, as well as possibly Kareem DeRoche at Around the Bean. And, you know, definitely shout outs and thank you to you, Dr. Chris, for, you know, having this open discussion with us, and for you know, just like I said before, you know, everyone's perspective. You know, we're not speaking for everybody. We're just trying to share what we see, and how we feel, what we think about these situations, to, you know, if nothing else, increase the dialogue, spread the word on what's going on. We can't feel uncomfortable about talking about this stuff. That's the only way we're going to come to any sort of progress. So
absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Talk about it. Hey, you're welcome back anytime, Dr. Chris. I'm going to go ahead and sign us off now, just on behalf of everybody at the Oddball Show. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening, and we're going to sign off to Chillax by JP Line Productions, available on Amazon, iTunes, jplineproductions.com. You can find us. Yeah, produced by DJ N-Dub, maybe DJ something else sometime soon, Dr. Chris Paddock.
DJ Dr. Chris.
DJ Dr. Chris, there you go.
There you go.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and let's see if we can get this going here. There we go.
Yeah.
Just chillax, baby.
Say when you got it, you got it. So, you just chill. Keep it natural. Chillax. Me and my friends make ends by the weekend, feeling kinda weak, so I need to get bent. When it comes to events, we breathe and we vent. Land a part of the heart, start me to dent like a trench. Kinda funky fusion, what we using a bend and nerd word. Musical blend, tend to render pictures with pens. Wins and losses, cost out away by the day, so I walk like a boss. Bitch, I'm just the sum of the earth, searching for a work in an object with no name, not wanting no fame. Just the name displayed on airplanes, everything so I can be. I sit back, relax, and say I'm good. Work hard all week, so I gotta do me. I got a couple feet, but I'm feeling free. Freeze, chill, nice, got ice cream. Listen to nice cuts, and I feel, wanna chill. That's right, time's never up. Chillax, roll me up one time, sack, and just chill. Be at ease with that. Smoke it up one time, in fact, just to inhale.